You wouldn't think that the guy who churned out such messes as The Happening and Trap would be responsible for some of the best movies of the 2000s. And yet, M. Night Shyamalan began as a powerhouse. Releases from the days of Signs and The Sixth Sense are among my favorite of films, but one leads the pack as a good candidate for my favorite movie of all time. This is none other than Unbreakable. Centering around an ex-athlete experiencing a midlife crisis, and made during a time when most people couldn't give a rat's tail about comic books, it doesn't sound like the type of movie to go breaking any ground. But that is exactly what it does. Unbreakable features one of the tightest, most well-crafted scripts I've ever seen, and a cast of characters that is small, but near perfect. Matter of fact, it's good enough to start its own series. Welcome to the Armchair Approves, where I purvey elite selections for movies and shows that are worth your time. For this series, I won't spoil the living daylight out of everything. I will, however, be discussing the premise and characters, so if you want zero spoilers, then I suggest watching it yourself and then coming back to see whether you agree with me. Otherwise, grab your favorite comic book and enjoy. David Dunn is not a happy man. He works a dead-end job as security for a football stadium where he has ample time to lament that his own football career was derailed by a tragic car accident. His home life is even worse to the point that he is planning to move out on his wife and son. However, things turn on their head when he takes a routine train ride that flies off the rails and kills everybody on board. Everybody except for him. In the weeks following the accident, he takes stock of his life and begins to seriously reevaluate his choices, as one would. When he finds a note printed on comic book store stationery that asks a bizarre question, he looks into the answer and is shocked by what he discovers. David goes to the address printed on the card and meets Elijah Price. Elijah explains his theory that superheroes and villains are very cartoonized versions of similar people with real, if more subtle, abilities, and that he thinks David is one of these people. He explains the idea as a spectrum of sorts, where individuals at either extreme might be capable of things greater than the average human, or fragile to the point of being unable to take action. Being born with osteogenesis imperfecta, also known as brittle bone disease, Elijah has spent his existence on the fragile side of this theoretical spectrum and has spent his career searching for somebody on the other. Why does any of this matter, you ask? Because their town has seen its fair share of tragedies recently, and Elijah believes the citizens need somebody to protect them, somebody to look up to, somebody like a superhero, i.e., somebody like David. Our leading man is not so hot on the idea, but after leaving, he begins to look at things with this idea in the back of his mind, and he can't help but wonder, could he truly be unbreakable? I have a bit of a tendency to paint movies in the most flattering light, but this one truly deserves it. Every piece from the top down functions precisely as it was meant to, and the result is an inventive, brilliant film that does not get enough credit in the wider circles of cinema. It truly represents M. Night Shyamalan at the peak of his game. For one thing, it's a masterclass in how to use the camera to your advantage. In early scenes, David is leaning away from the center of the frame, indicating that he is still in denial about what he is. As the film goes on and he starts to understand that maybe he has a bigger role to play, he stands more towards the middle of a shot, displaying that he's leaning into the possibilities. The shots themselves are very intentionally angled. They're almost always in square and rectangular spaces because M. Night essentially wanted to provide a moving comic book, and comics use panels to tell a story. David is often set against solid set pieces like walls, whereas Elijah tends to stand in front of windows, underscoring how the two men are respectively stronger and more fragile than the other. In the scene where David wakes up in the hospital following the train crash, the doctor explains that only one other person survived and it's not looking good for him. At the same time, we see this other survivor die in surgery in the foreground of the shot. It's such a clever piece of filmmaking that I completely missed it until CinemaWins pointed it out. Next, I want to give props to the costume department. Rarely do I have anything to say on this front, but it's good work on this one. The movie is framed in mostly gray and blue tones, so I imagine it was a bit of a challenge to find ways for the characters to stand out while also trying to find the line between oversaturating colors like a comic book and keeping it grounded. I think the award here goes to Elijah, whose look is distinctive even without the glass cane he carries, but also fits with the greater mise-en-scène. If you, like myself, are a film score nerd, you might be able to pick out James Newton Howard pulling strings in the background. Haha, strings. Because cellos and violins. Laugh, dang it! Newton is one of those people that consistently provides good work, but this just might be some of his best. I don't know what else I can say besides recommending that you listen for it during a viewing, because it's really cool. I especially love the progression of David's theme. Most of the heavy lifting, however, is accomplished by two things: the writing and actor performances. Bruce Willis and Samuel L. Jackson inhabit their respective roles like they were born to play these characters. Willis embodies an understated, vaguely dissatisfied portrayal of the protagonist who gradually grows more comfortable as he becomes more of a player in his own story. Jackson delivers the sort of calculated, eccentric performance that's on par with Javier Bardem in No Country for Old Men, and it's probably the best work he's ever turned in. Both men spark off the other, knowing exactly when to rein it in or play it up depending on what the scene needs. I'm guessing they kept pretty close to the letter of the script, but they handle the dialogue so naturally that you almost forget you're watching a movie at times despite the fantastical elements. The actors are certainly helped by way of being given a lot to work with. David and Elijah are polar opposites in most ways. Obviously, there's the strong-weak dichotomy, but it is far more than that. Elijah sees a purpose he can't fulfill. David fails to see the purpose he can. David is an active, sporty kind of guy, even if he hasn't been able to lean into it too much lately. Elijah is an intellectual who is as clever as he is knowledgeable. David is suppressing a lot of emotions and always seems like he's on the verge of breaking down. Elijah operates with his heart on his sleeve, but doesn't display much, if any, emotion. It's wonderful stuff, highlighted by the contrast each man finds in the other. Underneath all this is a complicated dynamic that is laden with mistrust at the start, but transforms into a tight friendship as the plot progresses. The ultimate star of the show is absolutely the script. Not only does it tell a great story, which we'll get into in a minute, but it practically lays out how the other aspects of production should go to fit with it. I'll give you one example and then let you experience the rest on your own. David has aquaphobia, which becomes very relevant, and so for most of the film you see him sitting away from sources of water placed conveniently in the center of the frame. 2 birds with 1 stone. See, it's stuff like this that makes it all the more baffling how badly Shyamalan's career went up in smoke in the 2010s. Unbreakable is, by necessity of imitating comics, a very visual movie, so the script was written in a way that would complement all the visual elements and it really ties the whole thing together. As for the narrative itself, I won't dispense any information I haven't already. However, as you likely spotted from my summary of the premise, it relies heavily on themes of taking action and of hope. The central concept of redemption, however, is something you'll also find in other early Shyamalan films, namely Signs and The Sixth Sense. He weaves these ideas into his story without dumping too much into any one scene, and they all come together into a poignant finale with just enough spectacle to keep casual viewers tuned in. The final scene in this movie is one of my favorite film clips ever, and if you watch the movie, you'll find out why. Additionally, there's a hidden layer of genius to Unbreakable that most people don't recognize at first. Unlike prior releases, Unbreakable does not paint its story in bright colors and epic battles. Instead, it takes a grounded, believable approach right down to the fact that David's abilities have very obvious constraints. Throughout the runtime, we see David experience real life without the Hollywood filter. His life is messy, and so is he. Yet beneath the rough edges is a good man who only wants to do the right thing. He is broken down and then built back up into something new. You might even say that he was deconstructed. Yeah, that's right, this movie invented the deconstructed superhero idea and nobody can convince me otherwise. But this sword has another edge. Today, we have options on options on options for superhero movies. Maybe too many. Not so in 2001. Even then, it wasn't a new concept, with 1978 Superman and various Batman adaptations having already been made. They were not, however, the box office dominating umbrella genre we have today. The idea was still fairly novel, and it was not yet cool to appreciate comic books. Perhaps you see where I'm going with this. While it didn't rake in $1 bazillion, there's no denying that it had an influence on superhero movies after that. Just 7 years later, in 2008, the world was treated to Iron Man and the birth of the MCU, which found itself somewhere between the cheesy neon flicks before Unbreakable and the down-to-earth feel in Unbreakable itself. I can't escape the sense that it pulled elements from this film to help craft its identity. I maintain that it was partially responsible for kickstarting the genre as a major industry player. But expert, you mellifluous, maladjusted master of movie criticism, I hear you say. What about the flaws? Well, to tell you the truth, I'm struggling to find any. Nothing under the sun is perfect, of course, but for the life of me, I cannot figure out where the breakdown is with this one. If I really had to nitpick, I'd say that maybe the script beats you over the head with the strong weak thing at times, but that's all I can muster. For a moment in the early aughts, it looked like M. Night Shyamalan, Bruce Willis, and James Newton Howard were shaping up to be the next Tim Burton, Johnny Depp, and Danny Elfman, a dream team with a plan and means of getting it done. Regrettably, this would be the last film the trio ever worked on together. But what a way to go out. It's one of those mythically rare cases where every last element of filmmaking fits like a glove with the others, heightening the production into something greater than the sum of its parts. Being more than 2 decades on the other side of the release, I can assure you that it holds up shockingly well against the juggernauts who stand on his shoulders. Basically, it's a stupendous movie, so do yourself a favor and watch it as soon as you can. Point of all this being, read more comic books.